have this agonizing cry in chapter 7. Who will deliver me from this body of death? And honestly, as a reader, you kind of expect a sympathetic pat on the back right there.
Right, you expect Paul to say something like, it's hard, just do your best.
Exactly. But instead, he pivots and basically starts engaging in what Beverly Roberts Gaventa calls trash talk. He looks at the cosmic powers of sin and death, capital S, capital D, and essentially says, you have no jurisdiction here.
Yeah, it's not just a comfort verse. It's a strict jurisdictional ruling. And I mean, that brings us to the Mount Everest of the New Testament.
Today we are tackling the big one for this deep dive into the text, Romans chapter 8. And for this session of Theology Brain, we aren't just skimming the surface of all things work together for good just to put it on a coffee mug. We're tearing the engine apart.
We really are. This is the chapter where everything shifts. If you've been tracking with the argument through Romans, we've had the diagnosis of the human condition and the definition of faith. And now we get the assurance.
But to really understand it, we are bringing in three heavy hitters. We've got Douglas Moo, Thomas Schreiner, and Beverly Roberts Gaventa.
The dream team. Or honestly, maybe the debate team, depending on which verse we're actually looking at today.
Very true. So before we start climbing this mountain, let's set the stage a bit. Where exactly are we in the flow of Romans? Because chapter 7 was heavy. It was claustrophobic.
It was incredibly heavy. It was the gloom, right? The struggle with the law, that feeling of being stuck in a body of death. And then you hit chapter 8, and it's like walking out of a dark, damp cave into the blinding sunlight.
Yeah.
Douglas Moo points out something really helpful here regarding the structure. He suggests this isn't just a linear progression, like step 1, step 2, step 3. He argues it's a ring composition or a chiasm that spans from chapter 5 all the way through chapter 8.
Okay, let's unpack this ring composition idea. I know chiasms are a favorite tool of biblical scholars, but help us visualize it. How does that work here exactly?
Think of it like a mountain structure or, a sandwich if you're hungry. Chapter 5 starts with the assurance of future glory. That's the base on the left side. Then the middle section, chapters 6 and 7, deals with the problem.
The problem of sin and the law.
Right. The struggle of the wretched man. We go down into the valley of the shadow. And then chapter 8 returns to the theme of chapter 5, the assurance of future glory.
So 5 and 8 are the bookends.
They are the peaks surrounding the valley. But there is a massive difference. In chapter 5, the assurance is stated. In chapter 8, that assurance is mediated by the Spirit. So the ring closes, but it closes with a totally new power source involved.
That makes a lot of sense. So chapter 8 picks up the phone that chapter 5 started dialing. It answers the question, okay, we have peace with God, but how do I survive the valley of chapter 7?
Precisely. And Thomas Schreiner adds another layer to this transition, too. He asserts that the shift from chapter 7 to chapter 8 is a shift from the impossibility of pleasing God under the law to the possibility and reality of pleasing him via the Spirit.
So it's a move from impotence, I want to do good, but I can't, to actual power.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's Gaventa. She always brings a slightly different flavor to the table. Schreiner is talking about human ability and pleasing God, but at Gaventa, she zooms out, right?
Way out. Beverly Roberts Gaventa applies a cosmic lens. For her, this transition isn't just about individual piety, like how do I stop sinning so much? It's about the rectification of the cosmos.
Right.
She insists that when Paul talks about sin and death, he isn't just talking about bad behavior and mortality. She capitalizes them. Sin and death are powers.
Powers like gravity, or powers like tyrants.
Powers like tyrants, cosmic warlords that have invaded the cosmos. It's like an occupation force.
So what enemy army has set up camp?
Exactly. And chapter 8 is the liberation event. It's D-Day. The Allied forces have landed and the occupation is being rolled back.
I really love that image. Okay, so we have our three guides for this deep dive. Let's briefly define their commentary DNA so you know who we are dealing with when we mention them. Let's start with Douglas Moo.
Douglas Moo, writing in the NICNT series, is essentially the anchor of traditional Protestant orthodoxy. His lens is reformed and evangelical. He's a structural architect. He loves the logic.
He's tracking the argument step by step.
Right. He views Romans as a tractate, a logical forensic argument. When Moo reads no condemnation, he sees a legal standing that leads to assurance. He's connecting the dots between justification in the early chapters and glorification in the future. He's the guy making sure the math works.
Okay, so Moo is the architect. What about Schreiner?
Thomas Schreiner in the BECNT is also affirmed, but comes from a Baptistic perspective. He's intensely exegetical, meaning he is digging into the grammar, but he has a very pastoral eye on obedience.
He doesn't want people just getting a free pass.
Not at all. This is crucial for him. He focuses heavily on the consequences of rejection versus acceptance. He is very concerned with what he calls actual obedience.
Meaning it's not enough to just say, I'm saved. You actually have to look like it.
Right. He insists that the Spirit empowers believers to actually fulfill the law, not just theoretically. He's the one insisting that grace produces a changed life. He balances the legal status with the transformative. If you aren't changing, Schreiner gets worried.
And finally, Gaventa, the one with a cosmic lens.
Beverly Roberts Gaventa in the NTL series. Her lens is apocalyptic and mainline. As we mentioned, she reads sin and death as ontological metaphors, capitalized powers that enslave humanity. Her methodology tends to minimize the human agency aspect.
Why minimize human agency, though? That seems counterintuitive if we're talking about how to live.
Well, she does it to highlight God's unilateral action. For her, if you focus too much on what humans do, you diminish the sheer magnitude of God declaring war on the anti-God powers.
Ah, I see.
She's the disruptor who widens the lens from my personal salvation to God's war against the powers of darkness. She wants you to look at the battlefield, not just your own shoes.
So we have the architect Mu, the pastor realist Schreiner, and the apocalyptic disruptor Gaventa. Let's see how they handle the text.
Yeah.
We start with verses 1 through 4. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
The now.
It seems like such a throwaway word in English. Do it now, but here it carries weight.
It carries massive weight. Both Gaventa and Schreiner highlight this word nin in Greek. It's not just at this moment. It is eschatological. It signals a change in eras. We have moved from the eon of Adam to the eon of Christ.
So it's literally a timestamp on the history of the universe.
Yes. It's like saying the war is over now. The previous second you were under the tyranny of sin. Now you are under the jurisdiction of grace.
And the reason for this no condemnation is linked to the law of the Spirit of life. Now, we have a bit of a terminology dusting up here regarding the word nomos or law, because in chapter 7, the law was problematic. It was provoking sin.
We do have a dust up. Mu and Schreiner debate whether law of the Spirit is a play on words like the principle or authority of the Spirit, or if it refers to the Mosaic law somehow. Is Paul saying the Spirit is the new Torah?
But Gaventa takes a totally fascinating angle here, doesn't she?
She does. She argues that the law itself, the Torah, was a captive of sin in chapter 7.
The Bible was a captive. Explain that.
In her view, sin is such a pervasive power that it co-opted the law. It hijacked the commandment. God gave the commandment to bring life, but sin seized it and used it to produce death. So the law was essentially a weapon in the hands of the enemy in chapter 7.
That is a terrifying thought, that the good thing became a tool of the bad thing.
Exactly. So when chapter 8 speaks of the law of the Spirit, Gaventa sees it as the law being liberated from sin's grip. It's the law finally doing what it was meant to do now that the tyrant sin has been evicted. The law is free to be the law of life again.
That brings us to verse 4, which seems to be the first major controversy among our commentators. Paul writes, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us. The question is, how is it fulfilled? And who is doing the fulfilling?
This is the crux of the early part of the chapter. And honestly, this is where your theology of salvation really shows its cards. Mu tends to see this as primarily forensic or imputed.
Forensic meaning courtroom status, right?
Right. Mu acknowledges the Spirit's work, but he's careful not to make our salvation depend on our performance. He leans toward the idea that Christ fulfilled the law for us. So when it says fulfilled in us, it means we are credited with Christ's fulfillment. He's protecting the doctrine of justification by faith alone.
But Schreiner disagrees.
Forcefully. Schreiner argues that this refers to actual obedience by Christians. He points out the passive voice be fulfilled implies God is the one doing it, but it happens in the believer's life.
So it's visible.
Exactly. He cites parallel uses of the word fulfill in Paul to show it involves behavior. For Schreiner, if you aren't actually beginning to obey the law, loving your neighbor, honoring God, then verse 4 isn't happening.
That feels a little risky, though, doesn't it? Sounds like we were back to earning it.
Schreiner would say no because it's the Spirit doing it, but he is adamant that the Spirit produces fruit. If there is no fruit, there is no Spirit. He is terrified of antinomianism, lawlessness. He wants to make sure we don't use no condemnation as a license to sin.
And Gaventa, is she refereeing this fight?
No, she's watching a different game entirely. She rejects the focus on human ethics here. She argues that verses 3 and 4 are about God condemning sin. Sin is the defendant in the courtroom. The fulfillment isn't a checklist for Christian behavior. It is God's rectification of the cosmos.
So she thinks Schreiner's making it too small.
Yes. She worries that if you focus on Christian behavior here, you turn the gospel back into a self-help project. You trivialize the cosmic war. For her, Paul is celebrating the death of the tyrant, not handing out a chore chart.
So Schreiner is worried about laziness, and Gaventa is worried about legalism or trivializing the cross.
Exactly. And Mu sits somewhat in the middle, trying to synthesize the assurance with the reality of the Spirit's work.
Moving on to verses 5 through 11, we get this contrast between flesh and spirit. Now, growing up, I always thought this meant my body versus my soul. Like my body wants chocolate, but my soul wants kale. Or my body wants to sleep in placao, but my soul wants to pray.
A very common misconception, largely thanks to Greek philosophy leaking into the church over the centuries. But our commentators achieve a minimum consensus here. Flesh sarx and spirit pneuma are not just lower nature versus higher nature. They are not parts of the human anatomy. They are realms of power, spheres of existence.
Like being in two different countries.
Precisely, or two different gravitational fields. You are either a citizen of the flesh or a citizen of the spirit. You aren't a dual citizen.
So when Paul talks about the mindset on the flesh, he isn't just talking about having a bad thought.
No. Schreiner analyzes the mindset or phronema here. He argues that those in the flesh cannot please God. He connects this to the concept of total depravity. It's not just that they behave badly, it's that their fundamental orientation is hostile to God. It's like a compass that is broken and can never point north.
That explains why he says they cannot submit to God's law. It's an inability, not just a refusal.
Right. And Gaventa, keeping with her theme, points out the capitalization again. For her, it is sin utilizing the flesh. It's an occupation by a hostile power. It's not just that you have bad habits, it's that you are occupied territory. The mindset on the flesh is a mind colonized by the enemy.
But then we get the solution. Verse 9. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit.
And here, Mu points out something interesting in verses 9 and 10 regarding the Trinity.
The Trinity. Does Paul use that word?
He doesn't use the word, but he uses the raw materials. Mu notes how Paul uses Spirit of God, Spirit of Christ, and Christ in you almost interchangeably in these two verses.
That is confusing. Is it the Spirit or is it Christ?
Mu argues this is the theological bedrock for the Trinity. It shows that the Spirit mediates the presence of the risen Jesus. You don't have three different spirits running around. The Spirit brings Christ to the believer. To have the Spirit is to have Christ.
And verse 11 brings in the resurrection. He who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies.
Schreiner emphasizes the already not yet tension here. This is a crucial concept for understanding Romans 8. The body is dead because of sin, meaning mortality remains. We still get sick, we still die. The body of death from chapter 7 hasn't been vaporized yet.
So we are essentially walking corpses.
In a sense, yes, we are mortal, but the Spirit is the down payment. The resurrection life is already at work metaphorically and spiritually, even though the full physical resurrection is future. It's like having the cure for a disease injecting into your veins. You are still sick, but the life is already winning.
This leads us right into verses 12 through 17, dealing with adoption and witness. Paul makes this inference. Therefore, brothers, we are debtors.
And the question is, debtors to whom? Paul cuts himself off. He says, not to the flesh.
Right. It's like he starts a sentence, we owe, and then realizes, wait, we don't owe the old landlord anything.
Exactly. If you live according to the flesh, you will die. Schreiner jumps on this. He says, look, this is a real warning. He argues that sanctification, this process of holiness, is necessary for salvation.
Ooh, necessary. That sounds like works again.
Schreiner would clarify, not that it earns salvation, but that it is the necessary evidence of it. If you live according to the flesh, you die. End of story. There is no version of Christianity where you stay in the flesh and live. We are debtors to live according to the Spirit because that is where the life is.
And then we get this beautiful, intimate term, Abba, Father.
Mu and Gaventa both connect this directly to Jesus' own prayer life. Abba is Aramaic. It's the language of intimacy, the language of the home. The amazing thing isn't just that we can talk to God, but that we are placed into the Son's relationship with the Father.
We get Jesus' status.
Yes. We don't just get to be servants. We get into the family. We have the exact same access rights as the Son.
But then we hit verse 16, and we have a bit of a grammatical showdown between our experts regarding the witness of the Spirit. Paul writes that the Spirit testifies well. Does he testify with our spirit or to our spirit?
This is a classic interpretive divergence, and it hangs on a tiny Greek prefix. The word is symmartere. The prefix syn usually means with. So Schreiner and Mu argue for witness with. It's a conjoint testimony.
Like two witnesses standing in a courtroom.
Exactly. Your own spirit says, I am a child of God. That's your internal conviction. And the Holy Spirit chimes in and says, yes, confirmed. It's a dual assurance.
But Gaventa disagrees with that reading.
She does. She argues that the syn prefix can act as an intensifier in Greek. She believes it means the Spirit testifies to our spirit.
What's the theological difference there? Why does it matter to her?
In Gaventa's view, we are the recipients of the assurance, not the cosigners. Think about the person who is depressed or doubting or crushed by sin. Their spirit isn't saying, I am a child of God. Their spirit is saying, I'm a failure.
So if its witness with that person is in trouble because they have no testimony to corroborate.
Exactly. But if Gaventa is right and it's witness to it, then the Spirit is speaking into my silence, into my doubt, telling me who I am even when I can't say it myself. It fits perfectly with her view of God's unilateral action. The Spirit announces my adoption to me even when I can't believe it.
That is a profound distinction. It actually leads perfectly into the next section, verses 18 through 25, which deals with groaning in glory. Because if we are adopted, why does life still hurt so much? Gaventa has a name for this period we live in.
She calls it the meantime.
The meantime. Not just mean as in average, but mean as in nasty.
Right. It's the time between justification when we were made right and glorification when everything is completely fixed. And this time is marked by suffering.
And it's not just us suffering, it's creation. The whole creation has been groaning together.
Yes. Mu and Schreiner agree that the word katasis creation refers to the subhuman created order. Rocks, trees, animals, the ozone layer.
Why are the rocks groaning? Did they sin?
No, but they were subjected to futility because of human sin. They are subject to decay, entropy, things fall apart. But Gaventa highlights the apocalyptic revelation here. She says creation isn't just waiting for us to get harps and go to heaven. Creation is waiting for the sons and daughters of God to be unmasked.
Unmasked, like a superhero reveal.
Yes. Right now, believers look like everyone else. We suffer, we die, we get cancer. But when we are revealed in glory, the cosmic occupation ends. The tyrant sin is overthrown and creation is liberated. Creation is waiting for the rightful rulers, us to take their thrones so the land can finally heal.
That is epic. It turns ecology into theology. The earth is waiting for us to be fixed so it can be fixed.
Exactly. And Paul mentions 3 groans here. It's a symphony of groaning. Creation groans in verse 22. Believers groan in verse 23. And the Spirit groans in verse 26.
Let's talk about the believer's groan. We are groaning as we wait for adoption. But wait, didn't we just say in verse 15 that we received adoption? You received the Spirit of adoption. Now we are waiting for it.
Schreiner points out this tension. It's the already, not yet again. We have the legal status of adoption. We are in the family. But we wait for the full experience of adoption, which Paul defines here as the redemption of the body.
The resurrection.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are adopted, but we haven't moved into the mansion yet. We're still living in the old drafty house of mortality. We have the papers, but not the inheritance. Not fully.
And while we're in that drafty house, feeling the cold wind, we have the third groan, verses 26 to 30, the Spirit's intercession.
This is one of the most comforting passages in Scripture. Mu points out that the Spirit translates our inarticulate groans into acceptable prayer. When we are too broken to know what to say, the Spirit prays for us.
And then the verse, everyone knows. Verse 28, all things work together for good. It's on every greeting card. But here's where it gets really interesting textually. Who is the subject of that sentence? Who is actually doing the working?
It's a massive textual and translation issue. Some manuscripts and translations imply all things work together, like the universe has a positive karma to it.
Which Paul definitely didn't believe in. He just talked about how the universe is groaning under decay.
Definitely not. Mu notes an option that the Spirit works all things, given the context of the Spirit praying in the previous verses. But he rejects it based on the grammar. Schreiner, however, argues forcefully that God is the implied subject. It is God working in all things.
So you should read, God works all things together for good.
Right. It's not that the things themselves are good, cancer is not good, divorce is not good, or that they naturally work out. It's that God is the master weaver. He is weaving even the dark threads into the tapestry.
And we have to define good. Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people read this and think, I lost my job, but God will get me a better paying one.
And that is the danger of reading verse 28 without verse 29. Schreiner and Mu are adamant about this. The good is defined in verse 29 as being conformed to the image of his Son.
That changes everything.
It does. The good is not comfort. The good is Christ-likeness. God uses the tragedy to sculpt you into the shape of Jesus. If you lose the job and get a worse one, but you become more patient and humble like Christ, Romans 8:28 has been fulfilled.
Which brings us to the golden chain.
Yes. Verses 29 and 30, foreknown, predestined, called justified, glorified.
It sounds unbreakable.
That's Schreiner's main point. He emphasizes the security of the believer. Notice that everyone who was foreknown is predestined. Everyone predestined is called. Everyone called is justified. Everyone justified is glorified.
No dropouts.
No dropouts. If you are in the chain at the beginning, you make it to the end. And notice glorified is in the past tense in Greek.
Even though it hasn't happened yet.
It's so certain that Paul speaks of it as a done deal.
Gaventa, though, takes a slightly different angle on predestination here.
She focuses less on the mechanics of individual election, like, did God pick me specifically out of the crowd, and more on the shape of the destiny. The destiny is conformed to the likeness of the Son. It's about the new human. It's about God creating a new family of humanity that looks like Jesus. She's less interested in who gets in and more interested in what they are becoming.
Finally, we reach the summit, verses 31 through 39, the assurance of hope. Schreiner describes this as a courtroom drama.
Yes. Picture the scene. Who can bring a charge? That would be Satan or the law. Who is the judge? God. Who is the defense attorney? Christ. Schreiner points out the legal logic. If the judge God has already justified you and the defense attorney Christ died for you, no charge can stick. It would be double jeopardy.
But Gaventa calls it trash talk.
And I absolutely love this interpretation. It's Paul taunting the powers. If God is for us, who is against us? It's a rhetorical challenge. He's looking at the cosmic bully's sin-death Rome and saying, bring it on, you got nothing.
And the logic of assurance in verse 32 is powerful. He who did not spare his own son.
Moo and Schreiner both link this to the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22. Remember, Abraham was willing to offer his son. Here, God actually does it. And the logic is from the greater to the lesser.
Explain that from the greater to the lesser.
If God gave the greatest gift, the life of his son, when we were enemies, he withhold the lesser gifts of protection and care now that we are family. It's like if someone buys you a Lamborghini, are they going to refuse to buy you a tank of gas? How will he not also freely give us all things?
And the list of enemies at the end. Verse 35, tribulation, distress, persecution. And then verses 38 and 39. Angels, rulers, heights, depths.
Gaventa notes something fascinating here. Sin is completely absent from the final list.
Really? Sin has been the main villain for 8 chapters.
Yes, but in the final list of things that cannot separate us, sin isn't there. Why? Because sin has already been dealt with. It's dead. It has been condemned in the flesh of Christ, back in verse 3. Now the list is cosmic powers, angels, rulers, heights, depths. These are the external forces trying to pry us away from God.
And the conclusion.
Nothing in the created order can separate us. Since everything outside of God is created, we are entirely secure.
Wow. Okay, we have walked through the text. Now I want to stage a little commentary showdown. We touched on it. But I want to drill down on the conflict regarding human obedience, specifically around verse 4. Because this feels like the tension point for listeners.
This really is the central tension of the chapter. Is it done for us or in us?
So in the red corner, we have Thomas Schreiner.
Schreiner takes the realist view. He looks at the text where Paul warns, if you live according to the flesh, you will die. Schreiner says that is not a hypothetical. That is a real warning. He insists that the Spirit empowers actual obedience. He is worried about what we call cheap grace. He mentions that believers are empowered by the Spirit to keep God's law. If there is no change, there is no Spirit. He's the coach blowing the whistle.
And in the blue corner, Beverly Roberts Gaventa.
Gaventa takes the apocalyptic view. She worries that if you focus on human obedience, look at me keeping the law, you trivialize the cosmic war. For her, verse 4 is about God fulfilling his own righteous purposes. Her critique would likely be that Schreiner puts the burden back on the human just when Paul is celebrating the death of the tyrant. She's the general pointing at the victory banner.
And Moo.
Moo is the synthesizer. He agrees with Schreiner on the necessity of obedience. He's not an antinomian, but he keeps the structure focused on assurance. He mediates by reminding us that the flesh is a realm we have left even if we still struggle with its remnants. We aren't in the flesh, but the flesh is still annoying us.
It seems like Schreiner is protecting the holiness of God, and Gaventa is protecting the sovereignty and victory of God.
That's a brilliant way to put it. And Paul, in his genius, manages to hold both. He demands obedience because the victory has been won.
So if we had to boil this entire chapter, this Mount Everest, down to one big idea, one sentence that synthesizes these views, what would it be?
I think, based on our conversation, it would be this. In the midst of cosmic suffering and the groaning of creation, the believer possesses an unbreakable assurance of future glory because the Spirit has applied the finished work of Christ to liberate us from the powers of sin and death.
Unbreakable assurance in the midst of cosmic suffering. That feels like the anchor.
It connects the meantime groaning with the golden chain security perfectly.
Now let's bridge this to application. Because it's easy to get lost in the theology of cosmic powers and forensic justification. What does this mean for you listening who is just having a terrible week?
I think we have to move away from the cliche of trust God more. That's far too simple for Romans 8.
Agreed. It feels dismissive.
We need to use Gaventa's concept of the meantime. We live in the intersection of the groan and the glory. The concrete application is this. When you are suffering physically, mentally, relationally, that is not a sign that it isn't working.
Right. We tend to think if I were a better Christian, I wouldn't be hurting.
Exactly. But Romans 8 says the complete opposite. The groan in verse 23 is actually evidence of the Spirit's presence. You are groaning because you have the Spirit of life in a world of death. The friction causes the groan. So your suffering isn't a sign of God's absence. It's a sign of your new nature clashing with the old world.
That is incredibly freeing. It validates the pain without losing the hope.
Yeah.
What about prayer?
Reference Moo's point on the Spirit's intercession. We often feel guilty when we don't know what to pray, or when we are just too exhausted to form sentences. The application here is the prayer of weakness. You can rest. You can literally just sit there and groan, and the Spirit translates that into perfect theology before the Father. You don't have to be eloquent. You just have to be present.
And finally, balancing that assurance with arrogance.
This is where we need Schreiner. Assurance should lead to obedience, not laziness. If you know you are secure, if you know the judge and the defense attorney are on your side, you are free to take risks. You are free to risk loving others sacrificially. You don't have to protect yourself because you are already protected. So go love someone difficult.
Assurance is the fuel for risk. I love that.
Precisely.
Well, we have reached the summit of the Mount Everest of the New Testament. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. It feels like the perfect ending.
It does, but
Right.
it raises a very provocative question. And this is the ghost that haunts the end of chapter 8.
What ghost?
The ghost of Israel. Paul has just argued that nothing can separate God's elect from his love. He's argued for the golden chain that God keeps his promises from start to finish.
Right.
But what about his own people? What about the Jews? They had the promises. They had the covenants. They had the adoption first. And yet the majority of them have rejected the Messiah and seem to be cut off.
Oh, I see the problem. If God's word failed for Israel.
Exactly. If God can't keep his promises to Israel, how can we be sure he'll keep his promises to us in Romans 8? Is God reliable?
That is the cliffhanger, the theological crisis that Paul has to solve next.
And that teases the deep, sorrowful, yet hopeful dive into the problem of Israel in Romans 9 through 11.
Join us next time as we descend from the summit into the valley of God's faithfulness. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.